Gas Station Business 101 Podcast, session number 26.
Welcome to the one and only Gas Station Business 101 podcast, where you can learn all the secrets about how to start and operate a gas station business successfully and make money. This podcast is brought to you by the good folks at CSB Academy Publishing Company. And now, here is your host, Shabir Hossain.
Hello there. Welcome to episode number 26. If you remember last week's episode, which was number 25, we talked about how to find a profitable and suitable gas station business in your budget or within your budget. That episode was the answer to a lot of the email questions I have been receiving, especially since I ran a email survey and sent out emails to all of my email subscribers asking them what is the biggest pain in their business? What is the struggle that they're having in their business? And a lot of the people said that they're having problem finding a business that they want to buy in that budget within the budget that they have. So I answered a lot of the questions in that episode. But I also said last week that I have had many more questions regarding, for example, today's episode. Is gas station a profitable business? Is it a profitable business? Do they make money? Do you get your return on investment? These are the questions I get often. Once a week, I will get one or two emails, but since I ran this survey, I have received over 20 some emails with questions similar to what I just said. Is gas station a good business model? Do gas stations make money? Do I get my return on investment? When do I get my money back? Or all these type of questions. So I've decided once again that this will be one more episode that I'll be answering all these questions that I got from the question that I asked through my newsletter. So again, this episode, all we're going to talk about is gas station a profitable business? We're going to answer that. Then, do they make money? How do they make money? And do you get your investment back in time? Not in 30 years, but in some reasonable amount of time if you get into this business. So this episode is more geared towards people that are not in this business as of yet. But if you're already in the business, I don't think it would hurt to listen to it. First, let's talk about why and how it is a good business, or is it a good business? Now, if you read my book, and I know some of you have, then most likely you know that I spoke at length about how gas station is truly one of the very few recession-proof business out there. I'm sure everyone remembers the big financial meltdown that we had back in 2008. Most of us lost something in that disaster. Some people lost everything. Some people lost part of their NASDAQ. Some people lost their 401k, their retirement. And as for me, I lost a lot. I still remember the pain and the heartache of losing so much that I worked so hard for over many years. I'm sure all of you still remember that time. I'm sure all of you have seen businesses closing down just around you, from restaurants to big-name retailers at the mall. But honestly, how many gas stations have you seen closing down during that time? Can you remember any? Most likely none. Zero. Even when we are broke and without a job, we still need gasoline for our cars. We still need that gallon milk for our kids. And if you're smokers or drinkers, you would still need that pack of cigarettes or that six-pack of beer. So, and if you need any of these, chances are you will go to your neighborhood market and not 5 miles down the road to the grocery store. Because if prices are same, we tend to go to the neighborhood store because we know we can just park our car right in front of the door, walk in and walk right out. So it's the convenience that people pay for. But again, lately, if you go to a grocery store compared to a convenience store, you will see most of the time the beer and the cigarette cost less in a convenience store than in a grocery store. It is true, and I have checked lately with at least 3 different nationwide chain of grocers. And I've noticed all 3 occasions, the cigarette and beer both were cheaper at most of the convenience stores than those grocery stores. During the recession, this industry, which is our convenience store, gas station industry, was one of the very few that have seen growth. Actually, we have seen growth in that time, meaning we have actually seen sales increased in some parts of the country. Now, fast forward to 2015. According to the Wall Street Journal, US automakers, means Ford, GM, Chevy, the big threes sold 17.5 million new cars last year, which is 2015, an increase of almost 6% over the previous year. Even though 5 years in a row, last 5 years, every year, there was an increase compared to the previous year. And last year was one of the highest, which was almost 6%. And last time that happened in this country was back about 15 years ago. We also sold around 40 million used cars in the same time. Not to mention, fuel prices are one of the lowest in many years, even though last few weeks it has been going back up a little, but still, most of the parts of the country, they're still under $2. Now, all these cars and trucks need fuel to run, and we're at the front line to provide them with that need. Good news is, you cannot order gasoline on Amazon or internet retailers or any other places online. For fuel, you still need to go to the local gas station. Similarly, you cannot order tobacco, beer, cigarettes, or milk online. You still have to buy them locally. Now, in this ever-changing world of internet, many retailers are truly suffering from losing sales to online retailers. Just to give you an example, take a look at the office supply chains. It could be your Office Depot, Office Max, Staples. Just to give you an example, I'm sure you have one of these within a mile or 2 in radius within your house. If you take a look at one of their parking lot, you will see hardly any cars there anymore. Because most of the big name online retailers like Amazon or eBay and some other online big names, office supply places, they're taking most of the businesses from these people. I'm sure some of you still remember the death of Circuit City. As big as they were, they still had to go, simply because they were losing way too much revenue to the online competitors. But luckily, we don't have that issue. Gas stations are still very unique, and thankfully, we are not still competing with any online retailers, and in near future, I do not think that will happen, where you can order fuel online and somebody will deliver that to your house, because it is a commodity that cannot be transported just any simple way. So you do have to drive to the nearest gas station and still fuel up your car. Another question I got asked at least once, I know, which is, why should I get into this business? Well, you should get into it simply to make a living. But more importantly, a life expectancy of a gas station business is over 50 years or more. Just look around you. I'm sure you will find stations that have been in that same exact location for decades. Yes, they may have gone through some facelifts, some upgrades, and some remodeling, but they're still there. Anytime you look at a new business, first we often consider the viability of that business and that industry. And as you can see, the viability of this industry is very solid and very strong, depending on the location and the state and the city that you're located at. Often, the investment is still not too high, especially if you're looking to lease rather than buy. Best of all, you usually see a cash flow the very next day after you buy a store that is an operating store, that is a running store. But don't get me wrong, not every gas station you come across makes money. So don't just go and buy the very first station you see for sale. I outlined a detailed gas station buying process that you should follow and see if a specific business is worth investing. Like everything else in life, not everything is always good, not everything is always bad. As long as you do your research and find the good one to invest, you should be okay. Now, I have another question that I was asked at least twice, and I will answer that as well. What does it take to get into it? Simple question, and I'm sure most of you will say, well, money. Of course, it's money. But I think the person that asked me that question wanted to find out, what else does it take? Well, as you guessed, it is cash. You're right. But with that cash, you also need a couple of other things like decent enough credit, good negotiating skills, and a whole lot of common sense. That's all you need. Now, the biggest question that, as I said, I got more than 20 emails. Do gas stations make money? To answer this question simply, I will say yes, gas stations, generally speaking, make decent money. I have made a decent living out of them for many years. And I'm sure you have seen many people around you that are in this business and making money, and they're making a good living. And you also see some big corporations. Depending on where you are, it could be 7-Elevens, Circle K's, Wawa, Food Mart, or some local chains that own hundreds of stores around you. And if they were not making money, I'm sure you wouldn't see them everywhere. And most likely they're expanding. You see more and more new locations coming up. Why? Simply because they make money. But one word of caution, like I just mentioned, not all gas stations are created equal. So not everyone is making money. Just because you see an individual running a store doesn't mean he's happy making money. But it is your job to find out which one does and which one doesn't before you buy one. Now, let's talk about a real life example and some basic calculation to figure out if a station that is for sale makes money or not. I will give you a real life example because I recently came across a station for sale by an oil company, not an individual. And, usually it's easier to deal with oil companies sometimes because they keep their data nice and neat. They have accountants, they have bookkeepers. So whatever you ask, they just print out the reports and send it to you or scan and email it to you, whichever it is. If you go to a single owner, and a lot of times they don't have good bookkeeping system. So they a lot of times write it down in a piece of paper or tell you that, hey, look at my daily receipts and whatnot. So those are very hard to gather a true report from. You have to work harder to figure out what they're doing. And in case of a bigger company, they furnish you P&Ls, balance sheet, sales tax, whatever you need, but doesn't mean they're always true. In this case, they were. I checked it. Just because it comes from a computer doesn't mean it's true. And a lot of times, if the oil company is small enough and struggling or big enough and struggling, there are chances that they may fuss some numbers. I haven't seen that from bigger companies because the fear of lawsuit and all that. But don't take their words for it. Do check them out. Do your due diligence, like I said. And the way I said it, you should follow that step. And that way, you don't have to just take their words for it or just read the report and say, well, I see it's making money, so I need to buy it. But in this case, as I said, the oil company contacted me, and I've known them for a while, and they said, we have this station for sale, which is not a high volume store, but you should look into it because we're not asking too much money for it. And I asked them for some basic reportings. I said, send me, 3 years of sales data and whatnot. And they did. And I'm going to share that with you. That way you can make the decision with me to see if this is a viable business or not. When they send me data, usually remember when people, sellers, bigger companies send you data, they usually send data, yearly data, I should say. My year of 2015, we did this much. 2014, we did this much. And a lot of times they break it down by month, but not all of them. If these numbers are coming from tax returns and from the accountant, they will go with year, 2014, 2015. And if you want to have the third year, they will go back to 2013 for that matter. But I'm better at calculating figures in monthly format because we calculate our sales, our profit, and everything else monthly, not yearly. So anytime I see those yearly data, I just break them down. I usually ask for monthly data. If I don't get it, I break it down to monthlies. So here, whatever I share will be monthly data. That way, it's going to be easier for you to calculate as well. Okay, now a little bit about this business. I'm not going to share the exact location, brand, or the oil company's name because I shouldn't. Plus, I signed a confidentiality agreement. So I cannot really share any of that. But I can share some numbers so you would know which store I'm talking about. And it could be hypothetical numbers, but in this case, this is true numbers. Okay, this is what the sales are. I figured out they gave me some monthly sales, and I've seen their sales are higher in summer months and somewhat lower in winter months. But average sale, if you take an average of 12 months, 2015, I'm only taking the sales of 2015 because I don't go back 2 years before. I just saw the trend. But if it was a drastic change between 2013 and 14 and again 14 to 15, then that would give me a red flag. But in this case, it wasn't. So I'm only going to talk about 2015. Okay, 2015, their average monthly merchandise sales were right around $37,000. And as I said, winter months were lower, summer months were higher. And in our area, that's the trend. Again, now, fuel sales were 63,000 gallons a month. Again, that's an average. It was higher in summer, lower in winter, but average was 63,000 gallons. And again, I rounded off these numbers. Instead of saying 62,937, I'm telling you it's 63,000 gallons. That way, it's easier to remember, easier to calculate, especially when you're listening to the show. Instead of getting fraction numbers, it's easier to picture a round numbers. So far, I told you that the monthly inside merchandise sales were 37,000 and the fuel gallon sales were 63,000, not dollar amount, gallons. And all other monthly incomes was right at $860. And when I say other income, usually most gasoline stations, convenience store have ATM machine, air machine, vacuum and such. And there is an income coming from that machine. And that income is about $860 in this store's case. Now, let's first figure out their gross profit for each month as far as their merchandise sales go. What I did is I looked at randomly, I picked out 7 and 8 items from different departments. For example, candy, soda, some grocery items, beer, cigarette, tobacco, and some deli type sandwiches that they sell cold and not freshly made, of course, pre-made, that you buy from different stores or vendors and you sell them. And I picked those items up and I know the cost of those. If you don't, you need to ask them for the invoices and look at their invoice where they show the cost and look at the selling price, figure out what their profit margin is. But since I already know how much a 16-ounce Budweiser beer cost, I just had to see their selling price and figure out what profit margin they were working at. And they fell right in the line where we all are, which is anywhere from 25 to 28, 29%. And in this store's case, they were right at 26%. So all I did is I took that 37,000, multiplied it by 0.26, which is 26%, and I got $9,620 gross profit coming every month just from the merchandise sales. You with me so far? Good. Okay, let's move on to the fuel, the gasoline part. Again, I noticed their average markup, meaning if whatever gasoline you brought in at whatever cost, they added about 7 to 9 cents a gallon on average to their regular grade gasoline. And I looked at 3 months of invoices versus their selling price, and I figured that they stayed right within the 7 to 9 cents range. There were days that they were 12 cents. But whenever I'm calculating fuel profit, I usually try to take the lower end, and that way I know it will not go lower than that. This way, you're always on the safe side. If you calculate on the higher side of the profit margin, then you tend to overshoot. And when you actually get into the business, you say, I'm not making the money that I thought I would be making. Instead, if you take the lower part of the margin, the range, that way you always do a little bit better than what you calculated, and that's always a positive thing. One more thing I forgot to tell you, that when I look at fuel, I break it down to all three grades: regular, plus, and premium. And if they have diesel, I take that into account as well. As I said, I have taken 3 months average. I looked at their invoices and I looked at their selling prices for 3 months. And I noticed, as I said, 7 to 9 cents on regular fuel, 12 to 15 cents on the plus, and 20 to 25 cents on their premium grade fuel. So I just simply took average monthly gallon of regular, which was 54,000 gallons of regular fuel that they sold on an average in 2015. I multiplied it with 7.07, meaning 7 cents. And I came up with $3,780. That means they average every month, they make about $3,800 by selling regular fuel. Then I went to plus, which was 4,000 gallons. And again, these are rounded figures. They sold 4,000 gallons of plus grade fuel, and the profit margin is 12. Again, I'm taking the lower end of the profit margin, lower range of the profit margin, which is 12 to 15. I'm taking 12 cents here. So if you multiply 4,000 times 0.12, you come up with $480, not much. Then I took the monthly average of premium fuel, which was 5,000 gallons. And here, in this case, the range was 20 cents to 25 cents. And again, I'm taking the lower end, which is 20 cents. So in this case, the profit is $1,000, round figure, $1,000. So let's now add up all the fuel profits, gross profit, that is. It is $5,260. Remember that $3,780 for regular, $480 for plus, and $1,000 for the super. All added up, $5,260. Now, we need to add both gross profits together, which is merchandise and fuel. So altogether, they came out to $14,880 because merchandise was $96.20 plus $52.60 for fuel. Altogether adds up to $14,880. Now, we will do the calculation for the other side, which is the expense side. We just did the income side. Now we're going to do the expense side. Based on the price they asked, which was $350,000. And as I said, the price was a decent price, and that's the reason I looked at it. Because lately, you cannot find gas stations for that kind of price. Most of the stations are, even in our area, are not less than $600,000. But this one was $350,000, including land and everything. And by the way, I think the station got sold. So don't email me asking for that store. I believe I heard 3 days ago that somebody signed an agreement to buy that place. And that's good luck to him because I think it's a good store and they will do well. Anyway, so I calculate the mortgage or the rent to be $3,500. Why $3,500? Because I always take 1% of the total investment as a rent. And remember this, if you ever buy a business with real estate, it is a good idea to buy it on a corporation name. For example, let's say XYZ LLC is your corporation. You can buy under that corporation and then lease it to your other corporation. Let's say the other corporation is ABC LLC. You should lease it to that other corporation for 1% of the rent. And the benefit you get is liability relief, meaning, God forbid, if something happens to your store, somebody files a lawsuit against you and that corporation holds the real estate, the company that you're operating under, let's say you're operating the gas station under a corporation called ABC LLC or corporation, and for some unforeseen reason, you get sued by somebody and it becomes a big lawsuit. If your real estate holding is under that same ABC corporation, you may lose that station. You may lose that real estate. But if you were leasing that property from another corporation, then your liability ends with your business. The real estate is owned by somebody else. It could be you're 100% owner of that company, but these are limited liability companies. At least I'm not a lawyer, but this is what I was told, and I was explained by an attorney one time that this is the best way to do it because you're not exposed to higher risk of losing your real estate. And I took their advice, and this is the way we do business. So I just wanted to throw that out. And the other benefit is, even though let's say you took a loan for $350,000. I'm sure you would put some money down, 20%, 10%, 15%, depending on your credit and your tax returns. But with the lower interest rate nowadays, let's say 3, 4, 5% interest rate, your mortgage payment will not be at 35%. Your mortgage payment may be at $2,200, $2,300. But see that difference of another $1,200 that I'm talking about? You should charge your own company full 1% rent and take that extra $1,200, put it towards the principal. That way, if you have taken a loan for, let's say, to be paid off in 12 years and you pay that extra $1,200 every month, you may end up paying it off in about 7 years and shave off that extra 5 years. I'm just throwing these numbers. There is a mortgage calculator. You can go and try it. It may be 4 years, maybe 5 years savings, maybe 3 years savings. But it is a savings and you should look at it. It's worth looking at it. But whenever we do this type of business, we always charge 1% rent, and that is the industry standard. So in our case, if we were to buy that store, if we would have bought that store, we would have charged ourselves $3,500 rent. Next on the expense is labor. That is one of the most biggest expense of gas station business. And I calculated the payroll to be right around $5,000. Now you ask me how I came up with it. Well, the store is open 18 hours a day, 365 days a year. Single coverage, meaning single employee that works. It's not a double coverage store. So what I did is I just took 18 hours a day times 30, means 30 in a month, 30 days in a month, times $9, because in our area, minimum wage is still $7.25. But if you can pay somebody $8 to $8 and a quarter, they're happy. And I added another 75 cents to $1 for all the taxes, payroll taxes. So I calculated at $9 per hour. And if you multiply that with 30, you come up with $48.60. Then I just rounded it off to $5,000. But remember one thing, in this payroll figure, there is no management salary, meaning if you're not working behind the counter ringing up register, there is no payroll for you. So I just calculated for single coverage employee, 30 days, 18 hours a day at $9 an hour. You come up with roughly around $5,000. Next, I looked at all of their utility bills for a few months, 2 months in winter and 2 summer months. And I averaged that all together to be around $2,750. And these utilities are usually, biggest one is power or electricity. Then you have water, your trash removal service, and some stores have natural gas. In this case, this store didn't. And also some other utilities like your cable modem. In this store, there was a cable modem for the high-speed internet and the phone service. Okay, next is tax and insurance. You have to pay property taxes, and there has to be an insurance that covers you from every other bad thing that may happen to the business, usually called BOP, meaning Business Owner's Policy. It covers you from employee theft to if the computer gets destroyed for some reason and you lose data. The best thing you can buy is a BOP, meaning Business Owner's Policy. It's a blanket insurance that covers a lot of things, from hurricane to any natural disaster to theft, break-ins, as I said, even employee theft. And altogether, in this store, the tax and insurance are right at $975 a month. Then comes one of the big chunk of expense, which is credit card fees. Thankfully, fuel prices are down, so credit card fees have come down quite a bit. Remember, I think we spoke about this in a episode many episodes ago, where I said a typical credit card fees is 1.75 to 2%. So if a gallon of gas costs $3 and somebody charges their credit card, you're paying as a retailer, let's say 2%. Some cards are 2%, some cards are 1.75%. But let's say In this case, we'll take the higher number. If somebody bought a gallon of gas at $3 from your store, you most likely paid on this customer's behalf to the credit card 6 pennies. You may not have made 6 pennies out of that gallon, but you have paid 6 pennies because he charged his credit card. But that same gallon, right now, let's say it is $2 a gallon. You're only paying 4 cents. So credit card cost has come down quite a bit because gasoline prices are down. So in this store, again, I had to do some adjustments in the calculation because if you look at 2013 numbers, which I did, and the credit card fees were much higher, then 2014 it came down a little. 2015 was okay. And I know in 16 it's even more down right now. So I calculated the credit card fees to be around $2,500. To be exact, it's $2,450. Then I added all the rest of the small mini things like your license fees. There are city licenses that cost in some cities $3,000 to $4,000 a year. In some cities, it's even higher. It's based on your sales numbers. So in our city, it is based on your sales number. And then in every calculation, every P&L, I calculate some shortages and losses, meaning every day when you do your paperwork, you will see that your money never balances. It could be $10 short, $5 over, $3 short, $1 over, even as high as $50 short or over. And then you have some loss, inventory loss. Some case of drinks breaks down, or somebody drops a case, breaks it, some beer that can be damaged, some cookies and sandwiches that you have to throw away every 2 weeks because they didn't sell, especially milk for that matter. Every 9 or 10 days they expire, and in a slower store you may always end up throwing milk, and that's an expense. And then you have store supplies, from your mop head to your cleaning supplies, and maintenance. Every gas station has some maintenance that they pay every month. For example, in summer months, you will pay somebody to cut the grass and they clean the yard and all that. And in other times, you will have your AC giving you headache, or your walk-in cooler breaking down, or your pump's not pumping well, or you have to replace the filters in the dispensers as well as the air conditioner. So whatever it is, you will always have some maintenance issues and expenses every month. And I calculated for those in this store is right around $1,116. I know I'm mentioning a lot of numbers here, and it can be confusing, especially if you are listening to me on the go, meaning let's say you're driving a car or working out or just walking around. It can be confusing to hear all these numbers and make sense of it. But what I did is, once I publish this podcast, there will be a show note on my blog, meaning you can go to gasstationbusiness101.com, and the very first page, since this will be the episode that will be on the top, on the very first page, it will say episode number 26. Just click on the button where it says show more, and go under that. You will see a spreadsheet with all these numbers. It's a P&L that I've created, and I'm attaching that to the show notes. So in the event you sit down in front of a computer, just go to my blog, look at that spreadsheet. You can download it, you can play with it, you can change numbers. This spreadsheet doesn't have any formulas. I just plugged in those numbers. They do not have any formulas, but at least you can look at it. It's done on Microsoft Excel. Okay, time to add up all these expenses. And once you total up all the expenses, the total came out to $15,791. I added up all the expenses here. Now, let's subtract that expense from the gross profit so we can finally get to the juicy part, which is, what is the net profit in this case? If you remember, our gross profit was $15,740, and the way we got that number was by adding up the fuel gross profit, the merchandise gross profit, and all other income, meaning that air machine, vacuum, ATM, all of those added up together. All three items together was $15,740. And now we have our expenses, which is $15,791. So if we subtract this number from the gross profit number, we come up with $51 loss. This is not a profit. This is loss of $51. So as you can see, the store is doing almost break even or a little less than break even, depending on how you look at it. Because you remember, I've taken all the lower numbers when calculating profit. So let's say this is a break even store. And in my case, I just declined and I politely told them that I'm not interested. But if you are new to this business and willing to work 10 to 12 hours every day, and let's say your funds are limited, the way we all started, this is the way most of us started, which is our funds were limited. We wanted to work longer hours and just save that payroll. And I think I shared my story where I got into a store which was way below break even. I didn't even know about that. I didn't know how to calculate that and all that. And I suffered and I struggled quite a bit. But in this store's case, let's say this is going to be my first business and only business. And I have limited funds, so I want to get into it the cheapest way possible. And I did. I would make a decent living. How? First thing is, this store is right now run by employees. And you know, when employees run versus owner operation, there is always a difference because you're always keeping an eye on what's running out. And if there is let's say a favorite brand of cigarette or beer or something, they are out, the employees don't usually care that much. They don't notify anybody. If the vendors provide them with the next delivery, it's fine. If not, they will tell the customers, I'm sorry, we're out. But in your case, you will make a point to have that item before that the customer comes back again. So similarly, with better customer service, with cleaner store, with better merchandising, most of the time, 95% of the time, when a owner works in a store or in a business, it can be a gas station, can be a clothing store or anything else for that matter. Usually business increases anywhere from 10, 15, 20%. If the store always had a bad customer service and then you come in and improve it, even merchandising, if let's say the store had a bad merchandising and bad customer service and then you come in and improve it, you may see improvement as high as 30, 40% even. But again, to be realistic, in this case, the store looked decent and the people that were working didn't look that bad. So I was guessing that if I walked in there and worked myself, I would increase the business by, let's say, as high as 20%, as low as 15%. But there will be an increase. And in that case, even an increase of 10 or 15% can bring you extra, let's say, $2,000, maybe $2,500. Because anything you do after break even is all profit. Remember that. And I know I talked about it before. Let's say right now the store is doing $37,000. If you take that sale to $55,000, would you be burning more electricity? Would you be paying more payroll dollars? Would you be paying more, let's say, natural gas or phone bill? No. All of those expenses remain the same. Only thing increases is your sales. So let's say you increase this store sales from $37,000 to $57,000. So that $20,000 at 26% margin, which is over $5,000, is just yours to keep. No other expenses are coming out of that. So as I said before, for me, the store didn't make any sense because I would hire employees or keep the same employees and run it the way it is running. So I would most likely not see much of an improvement other than the merchandising that I would do differently and the pricing strategies that I would do differently and the promotion that I would run. Maybe I would see an increase of 5, 7, 8% sales increase. But to me, that profit of $700, $800, $1,000 is very nominal for me to put that effort and energy and the investments and the headache. So I explained to the oil company and I said, listen, I can't do this, but good luck to you. And I found out that they found somebody else, which I thought they would because it's a decent property, good looking property, and with a decent price. But again, as I was telling you, if somebody is willing to work hard for the first year and a half to build this business, for example, let's say you're young, energetic, and you want to get into this would have been a perfect business for somebody that would work there for 2 years and then in that 2 years, you would increase the business to, let's say, 50, 55,000. Remember this, if you're making that 5,000 or 6,000 profit, you're also working in the store and saving the labor cost. So that's yours to keep as well. So you're getting a paycheck because you're working behind the counter and you're making the profit. So a person can easily make $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 even from a store such as this. And in 2 years' time, you can save enough money and go buy a bigger store with $100,000, $150,000 down payment if you plan well, keep a good credit, good tax return, and you save a lot of this money that you're making. Good thing is, if you're working 10 hours a day, you don't have much time to go outside and spend that money. So a good thing is, other than your utility bills, your rent, whatever you do at your home, those fixed costs and expenses, you may not be spending more money outside of that expense. So you will end up saving some of this money. And most oftentimes, I've seen people that work very hard for 2 to 3 years in a business such as this will end up buying a very nice bigger store, and then they would hire employees and relax a little and manage the store, and in 10 years time they will have 7, 8 stores if they plan and work smartly. Lastly, let's talk about ROI. As I said, I have had questions regarding ROI, which is return on investments. Typically, if you are leasing a business where there is no real estate involved, your investment should come back within the first 3 to 4 years. I have seen stores that returned the investments in just 2 years. So it really varies, but it shouldn't go over 4 years. For example, say you leased a running gas station business for $200,000. Means you paid goodwill $200,000 and inventory, whatever inventory was at cost. And now your monthly net profit out of that gas station is $8,500. Mind you, I didn't say if you're working behind the counter or not. I'm assuming this store is fully staffed and you're just managing the place and looking over everything, and you're still making, let's say, $8,500. So in this case, you get your investment back in little less than 2 years. Because if you multiply 8,500 times 24, I'm sure it's right around 200,000 somewhat dollars. Let's say 204,000, I'm guessing. So in this case, you're getting the money back in just 2 years. But remember not to add the money you paid for the inventory into this investment calculation, because always remember, inventory money is separate than what you invested in the business. Of course, you invested the money for inventory, but this is a liquid asset. You can always cash it out anytime. Within 7 days, you can liquidate inventory very easily. And in 2 years' time, after you get your investment back, you still have that inventory in your store. So that investment of your inventory is not included in that 200,000. So keep that separate, and your accountant will calculate your inventory separately, as you will see. Now, if you're buying the same business with real estate, the calculation becomes very different. Say you bought that business, instead of leasing, you bought it outright for $800,000. And I'm sure this is a more realistic number, since a business that can be sold for $200,000 as a lease, usually in our area, would be about $800,000 if you buy it outright, meaning with real estate. Now, your calculation will be different. To buy the property, you would have to put some money down, right? Of course, no bank will loan you money without any down payment. And you're putting that money towards the purchase price. So your loan payment will be lower than your rent payment. And as you recall, we just spoke about the $350,000 loan where you would put some money down, and with the interest rate, your payment would be lower than $3,500 in that case. And in this case, it would be, let's say, if it's 1%, it's $8,000. But when you put some money down and you finance it at 3, 4, 5% rate, your mortgage payment will most likely be around $5,200 to $5,700 range. It may be as high as $6,000, but not more than that. So as you can see, your P&L, meaning your gross profit, will still be the same, but your expenses will be less in two different ways. One is your mortgage payment will be lower compared to your rent. Another thing that we don't think about often, which is your depreciation cost. When you buy a property such as a gas station, there are so many things involved, meaning there are equipment such as pumps, canopy, and tanks and all that. Then there are fixtures, there are buildings and structures and cash registers and all that. Everything depreciates over time. And your accountant will tell you that there are depreciation scheduling, meaning some things you can depreciate over 10 years, some things you can depreciate over 7 years. But when you buy something, let's say you bought it in 2016, for next 7 years, you should be able to depreciate a lot of these things. So let's say, for example, in this business, you made $100,000 this year. When you go to file taxes, the depreciation cost will offset some of your income. Meaning, for example, just a ballpark rough idea, and again, don't hold me to it because I'm not an accountant, but I will just say it this way. Let's say you made $100,000 and you're at 30% tax bracket. You should be paying 30% of $100,000, right? Minus your expenses, of course. If you own a house, you take deduction. If there are school expenses, there are a lot of expenses that you deduct. So let's say your taxable income comes down to $60,000 and you are at 30% bracket. So 30 times 60 should be about $18,000 tax that you owe to the government. But in this case, when you take the depreciation into this picture, your tax considerably lowers. I'm not going to say a number because I don't know exactly, but it may be in the thousands of dollars. Let's say instead of 18,000, it may be 15 or 14, depending on how your accountant handles the depreciation. But you see, this is another savings that we don't think about. And also remember, the mortgage interest that you pay is tax deductible. So these are the things we don't consider very often. And on the other hand, I need to also mention, since I brought up mortgage interest, if you're leasing, your whole lease payment is deductible. But that's about it. But when you buy it with real estate, you get to deduct a lot more things, not to mention in 10 years' time, 7 years' time, 12 years' time, depending on the length of your loan, you own the asset outright. And once you do, there is no more mortgage payment and you get to keep the whole money, meaning your net becomes much bigger. So, for example, if you were making $9,500, $8,500 for the next 7 years or 8 years, when the loan gets paid off, that $6,000 mortgage payment comes right back to you, meaning then your profit from that gas station jumps from $8,500 to $15,000 or $14,000, depending on how much his mortgage is. You see, the whole picture changes when you buy with real estate. So I know it's hard for us to jump in and buy with real estate because it is high dollar amount and banks are tight, especially when it comes to gas station business, because there are risks involved and some of the banks have got burned over the year 2008 and 9 and 10 when all these meltdowns were taking place. There were so many businesses that were closing. So banks are still not as open when it comes to business loan. They're opening up for the housing market, but business loan wise, they're still not as open and as upfront as they used to be. But I know they're coming along, and in about next couple of years, few years, business will be again as usual, where there will be more loans readily available and not as much scrutiny as there are now. But again, if you can afford it, go for something that you can buy it with land. If not, start off with leasing, see how you like it. Once you like the taste of the business, then take the step and buy it with land once you can afford it. If nothing else, as I said, if you work hard for 2 years, you should be able to save enough money to put a down payment to buy a business such as a gas station. Now, one more thing. Once again, as I mentioned in episode 25, which was the previous episode, that two identical stores with identical sales volume in two different cities in two different states can show very different net profit or loss. If you recall the two examples I spoke about, where one store was in Chicago and one was in a small town in Mississippi, I just wanted to mention that once again so everybody is clear. In bigger cities, the rent or mortgage is much higher. The property taxes are higher. The employee cost is also high, meaning if you can hire somebody at $750 in Alabama, most likely in Chicago you have to hire the same person for $950 because cost of living is much higher in those cities and in those areas. So even though, let's say, as I said, identical sales, so your gross profit will still exactly be the same. For example, if both stores made gross profit from fuel and merchandise $30,000 a month, their expenses could be very different. Let's say the one in Mississippi could have all expenses together added up, maybe $15,000 compared to $25,000 in Chicago. So you see, in one store you're making $15,000, in other store you're making only $5,000 with the same exact sales volume, sales number, profit margin, and everything else. Not because of anything else other than your cost for that store or the cost to buy that store is 3 times more or 2 times more than what it would be in another parts of the country. I just wanted to make that very clear. Since this episode again is the result of answering many emails, I will not be answering any other emails like I usually do at the end of the show in most episodes, but I will not be answering anymore because I think I have answered enough emails today. But one thing I will do in this episode, which is I will recommend a book once again. And the reason I did not recommend any books in last 2-3 episodes because I haven't had a chance to catch up on reading. But lately I had a chance and I caught up on some of the readings and I read a wonderful book. And this book is called Business Adventure, 12 Classic Tales from the World of Wall Street by John Brooks. Trust me, you will enjoy reading this book because this is a financial thriller. It's not a book that you need to learn a lot of things. It's a book that you will enjoy because, as I said, it's a financial thriller based on true story. I really enjoyed reading it. And I know you will too. And one thing I will say, which is Bill Gates, the Bill Gates from Microsoft, or the previous owner of Microsoft, the richest man, said this was the best business book he has ever read. So I'm sure you can see why I'm recommending this book, and I know you will enjoy reading it. You don't have to write down the name of the book. Just go to my show note, and the link of the book will be on that show note. Now, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter. If you look on the show note, just below the show note, there is a place where you can just click and sign up for my newsletter. And please do so I can ask you questions like I did 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. And this way we can communicate better and I can better understand how and what are the ways that I can help you. And I sure would love to see a review from you in iTunes if you are a podcast listener, and only if you enjoy listening to my podcast. I sure would appreciate that. And also this way I can reach more audience and I can grow with bigger audience and help more people. So thanks once again for spending the time listening to my show. And I will talk to you in next episode. Take care.
This has been the one and only Gas Station Business 101 podcast with your host, Shabir Hossein. This podcast was brought to you by CSB Academy Publishing Company. Be sure to join us next time as we share with you the secrets about how to start and operate a gas station business successfully and make money.